Welcome to Business Talk with me, Michael Avery. We've just passed the 500,000 views milestone, and that certainly wouldn't be possible without your support. So thanks for making Business Tech the biggest business news website in South Africa, and for tuning in when you can to watch this fantastic series where I've had the opportunity to sit down with South Africa's business leaders, doyens, captains of industry, just to find out how they are surviving and coping through this particular phase of the pandemic. Now, the property market showed a big bounce out of the hard lockdown last year. That was on the back of, I think, pent-up demand as well as multi-decade low interest rates. But what are we seeing early into the new year? Samuel Seeff is chairman of the Seeff Group. And Sam, it's always a great pleasure to talk property and kick the bricks with you. Firstly, what are some of the challenges of operating a business during this pandemic? And how has Seeff overcome those challenges? Considering that we've now basically had 12 months to adapt to this new normal?
Yeah. Firstly, thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me on your show. So obviously, the fundamental is just really the safety protocols that we had to put in place right up front. I mean, that was something we'd never encountered before. All of a sudden, you're sending out emails and you're doing WhatsApps and trying to assess people's health and having to do the sanitization and set up meetings and etc. And that was quite interesting and quite new for us. You know, normally you'd make an appointment, meet the client and go and view the property. Now you had to do background checks, where have they been, how they've been feeling, who they've met, seen, etc. So just coming up with a proper protocol for safety was the first basic that we had to do. And we got on top of that pretty quickly. One got the forms, you had them filled out, you had them double checked. We went back to all our clients initially to check with them a week later that they were all right. So we did whatever was necessary in a strict accordance of the guidelines. You also had to then ask the seller to move themselves out of the house when the client came through. It was quite interestingly initially over the initial period. Obviously, that has relaxed a little bit. So that was the one factor that we had to consider. The next was obviously working with our offices. And that proved to be very interesting because during COVID, obviously the first 2 months, almost this time last year, April and May, offices were completely closed. Everybody was at home. We weren't doing work. But when we got back to being able to take clients out after a lot of lobbying, the industry and myself and others, a tremendous amount of lobbying to be able to take clients out under the strict protocols, agents in many instances didn't want to come back to their offices. Were afraid to, understandably. So we had to learn how to move quickly virtually. And the impact of that has been a number of factors, almost all positive in terms of how we're interacting, how we're dealing with our agents. Some of our officers have decided not to come back. They felt it wasn't necessary. The agents aren't that keen to be working in offices under COVID. So where we've had leases that have expired, we've let them go. And we've consolidated. So it's actually been an interesting learning curve for the industry as a whole in terms of that.
When you say, Sam, just to interject quickly, when you say positive, is it just a productivity issue, or are you finding now that because we can do things virtually, you're managing just to extract a few more out of those limited hours that we have in the day?
Yeah, it's both. So what we've done is the productivity certainly has increased, but the third element of what's come out of COVID has been our shift to doing things in a technologically higher gear. I'm going to put it that way because our industry's average age 58 and not necessarily all equipped. But all of a sudden, we found agents, literally from those still who are active and strong in their 80s, getting on and joining Zoom meetings and Google Hangouts and finding how to push the mute button and how to interact on a basis within the branch meeting, how to deal with clients, how to create virtual showings. And I think for the industry as a whole, what we've seen and what we've done is move in the space of 8-9 months what might have taken us 3 or 4 years.
Right.
And I think that as a result of that, we've been more efficient. Our communication with our clients have been more efficient. Our offerings have been more efficient and more effective. Equally, we've done well on the other side. And I think it's Seeff certainly, but I think most of the industry has had to take a look at the overheads and decide, do we need extra offices? Are they effective? Is there a better way to do this? So we've consolidated some of our offices, we've closed some of the others, and we're finding we can do just as well on largely a lower overhead than we managed prior.
And that speaks to what I think will be a sticky change. I mean, a lot of people now are trying to predict what the future is going to look like. How many of these things that we had to adapt to and quickly implement during a lockdown are actually going to become permanent features of the way we do business? How much of your business do you think will have changed fundamentally going forward?
I think a significant amount. I think we've upgraded our skills in our agents. There's the talk about, are you a tech-enabled real estate company, or as you have overseas, a real estate-enabled tech company? So we're a real estate company, first and foremost, but we've had to adopt and increase our tech skills. And as I say, this has moved this, shifted very quickly. And I think that'll be a fundamental change. I do think that we're transacting a little bit more online, always subject to the buyer wanting to come through and view the property, but virtual tours, floor plans, an ability to create a better environment for a buyer to look through, because they're afraid, they don't want to go out, they don't want to see as many properties, they don't want to be exposed to as many people, has now meant that we've got to give them a better offering online. And all our focus is now towards that, in terms of saying, right, what does the client want? How can we improve the experience in an online manner?
And I've often
those will last us going forward.
I've often looked at property, having bought a few in my short life, as a game of filtering. And often you'll go and see 100 properties before you filter down to 10, and then you go back and then you'll filter again. And I think what technology offers is a way to enhance the efficiency of that filtering progress or process, which is obviously good for the buyer, but also good for the agent as well.
And good for the seller.
Yeah.
They're also not having people traipse through their house who are not qualified and not likely to end up buying their property. Yeah. So in that sense, it's been positive all around. In actual fact, what we've learned from statistics internationally, because we don't necessarily have them here, is that buyer viewings have probably decreased from between 10 and 14 down to 4 before a buyer makes the selection, by exactly as you say, the filtering process. And what we've had to do is to raise our game in terms of photography, in terms of walkthroughs, in terms of virtual tours, to enable that filtering to happen. And it's an ongoing and refining process. We're not quite as good as we'd like to be, but we certainly are better than we were a year ago.
Yeah, it's remarkable how we've adapted during that crisis. Now, what did you make of the budget speech by Minister Mboweni recently? What were the pleasing elements, and perhaps what were the things that you didn't like?
So clearly, under the circumstances, which are very trying and very tough for him, I think it was a good budget speech for South Africa Inc. I think we were all very happy and pleased by the no increases in tax, and in fact, the ability to actually reduce the average man, middle to lower end, his tax payable. I think that was positive. There was two major negatives for me. The first was the disappointment on the continuing spend on the state-owned enterprises. And, we haven't seen a SAA plane in the sky for almost a year now, and I don't think anybody's missed it. So why continue with something that really, if you look at the day-to-day South Africa and you say, well, there's no SAA anymore, they would say, who cares? We're not bothered. They could and should have done a deal with somebody else. They could have left the name but had an investor partner. So continued subsidization and payment for state-owned enterprises that clearly are not worth their salt is a frustration for all of us. And particularly in terms of property, I think that what we've seen and missed here is a trick that in the upper end, they've increased transfer duty quite significantly over the last few years. And rather than the effect of adding to the fiscus, it's taken away. And what's happened is buyers at that upper end, which already at the moment is very, very quiet since the last 4 or 5 years, are now saying, right, rather than sell and pay capital gains tax and the significant transfer duty, I'll rather just upgrade or change where I'm living, etc. And the fiscus is losing out on both sides. So I think there's an opportunity to bring transfer duty down, and we'll certainly push for that in the next budget.
Yeah, and therefore stimulating demand and volumes and increasing what Caesar gets at the end of the day. If you look at
Absolutely.
what's changed fundamentally in the property industry over the past year, I mentioned it in my introduction. It was very interesting to see. There was a graph in the Saab Quarterly Bulletin showing just how mortgages climbed significantly following the hard lockdown. But what do you see as the big changes in the property industry over the last year in the property market?
So Michael, although we look at the pandemic and the lockdown as the thing that sort of obviously comes to mind first, the real change this last year has been interest rate decrease. So from 10 down to 7% has had a massive impact. And whereas we literally bounced out of the lockdown period, June was kind of, I suppose, finding our feet, but July to December was, in our case, arguably the best 6 months we've had in the last 8 years. Industry as a whole, turnover pushed up, and it was specifically in the 3 million and below bracket, and a lot where first-time home buyers were coming in. So what we saw there was, for the same amount of money, arguably you're buying 30% more property. So what we've seen is the price in effect coming down by 30%, and buyers have come in in their droves, and I think will continue to do so. Certainly the first part of 2021 indicates that that's the same. Now you're hearing somewhere people saying, well, all that's going to do is lead to increase in prices, and so that's going to gate the drop in prices. Well, actually, we haven't seen that. It's been for estate agents industry, a very good market. There's been a reasonably good balance of sellers coming onto the market. There's strong demand in that particular price bracket, and that's a trend we see continuing. A lot more first-time buyers coming into the market. Now we're averaging roughly between 18 and 20,000 transactions a month at the moment, which is roughly 240, 250,000 transactions a year. If you look at arguably the economically active people at 8 million in South Africa who could be buying, it's only a 3% level. So there's still a lot more demand to come on. What we have to see is sufficient supply coming on so that we're not seeing an increase in price. At the moment, we're not seeing that yet, but that could be if the supply starts slowing, as it has done in many places around the world. Right. We will begin to see a gradual increase in prices.
And I've just got just to interject quickly, reference my area around Parkview and looking at properties in Parkhurst, and just out of curiosity to see the supply that came on to the market during last year, but how quickly that has been snapped up and how rapidly that supply is diminishing. That certainly feeds into that trend. Are there particular hotspots that you're seeing interest that are outperforming others?
Well, okay, so that's the big factor, is the interest rates. The next factor that comes out of the pandemic, I think, has been the increase in buyers looking to say, can I live outside the major metropolitan areas? Oh. And we've seen that. We've seen big growth in particularly coastal areas, but equally places which are offering greater value for money and what's considered to be a more secure lifestyle. So, for example, the north coast of KZN, if you're coming in and you're close in the Umhlanga, Belito area, huge growth as a result of being near the airports, people saying, I don't need to be in Johannesburg itself, let me rather relocate to the coast. It's arguably, in their viewpoint, a better lifestyle, can commute, easy commute, straight into the airport, hour flight, in Johannesburg, can be in Sandton CBD quick with a car train, do your business and come home, even on a daily basis. Now, you wouldn't do that daily, but there will be people who will do that twice, sometimes 3 times a week. It's doable. So what we're seeing is coastal towns have had big influxes. Plettenberg Bay has started seeing prices push up again at a level we hadn't seen for many years. Same with Knysna. You've got an increase in demand in Hermanus as well. So that, I think, is the next interesting takeout from the pandemic, is how people are saying, right, let me go for lifestyle together with work. I'm not going to work less. I'm going to work as hard, maybe even more hard. Yeah. But I'm going to do it in the comfort of my own home, and I'm going to choose where that home is going to be. So those are the two major elements that we're seeing.
I think it's a good point you raise about probably working more now, that we're not working from home, we're almost living at work. And in households, perhaps where there's a dual income household and there's only one study, someone's always got to take the short straw and do their video conferencing in one of the spare rooms or the bedroom. Is any of that?
Or like myself at the dining room table. Sorry.
I do these in the TV room. But does this mean that consumers are now also looking potentially to upgrade properties, to say, right, if this is going to be a blended approach to work in the future, we're still going to go into the office, but we're going to do the bulk of our work at home. Do we now need to look for a house with 2 studies, that extra room? Is this leading to changing buyer patterns as well?
Very definitely. Something we would never have predicted a year ago. Certainly either the extra room or the workspace or the ability to be able to communicate, as it were, with the outside world on a non-disturbed basis is definitely high on the agenda. And we're seeing it. So people are buying up. But that's a good thing in this marketplace, where the interest rates are a little bit low. You're in a position where you can afford to sell, there's good demand, and you can buy up, and you're dealing with the lowest mortgage rates we've had in 50 years. So all good and all positive.
Yeah, very positive signs, provided we can avoid the worst of maybe a third wave. And there's obviously a lot of speculation and talk about going into level 1 just ahead of Easter. Are we potentially repeating the mistakes that we made just before December? But I want to ask you, and we're not epidemiologists, Sam, if you just look into your crystal ball and you think about the property industry moving forward, lower interest rates obviously boosting sales, has put some strain on the rental market, I'm sure. There's things like semigration that we've just discussed. That's obviously a big buzzword, people working remotely. What do you think the future of the property market is going to look like?
So I don't think it's going to be too different to where we are now. And I think one's obviously got to segment the property market into different aspects. So the one that's concerning, obviously, is the commercial and retail market. Because as we say, as people are spending more time at home, companies are either cancelling their leases or letting them expire, or certainly downsizing. So we are definitely going to have an oversupply of office space for quite a while. Equally, we have retail where there's very little demand. People aren't out and about as much as they used to be. Restaurants, cafes, those kinds of things. There's no demand where it used to be, particularly in a CBD environment where you used to rely on your office workers to be your clients. They're all staying at home, therefore the vacancies are increasing in that regard. So those are the negatives, if you want to call it. The positives I have talked about are, as I say, the interest rates, the increasing entrance into the market of first-time buyers, very big positive, and they're buying from people who are saying, right, let's sell, we've now made a bit of capital growth, let's potentially reinvest, and they're putting it higher, and you have that chain effect on an upward draft, which is obviously very positive for the market. And those are the trends that I'm seeing that are good, positive, and augur well for South Africa Inc., because it's very important we bring more and more first-time buyers into the market. Predominantly, they're black buyers. They're middle class. They've held on to their work positions for a while. They've established a little bit of funds. They're now in a position to come into the market, and that's very positive.
Absolutely. It's one of the reasons we often at a macro level look at US housing starts just to gauge the strength and health of the US economy, the world's largest consumer-driven economy, because a consumer derives, let's face it, on average, the bulk of their feeling of wealth from their primary asset, which is their home. They're just a handful of entrepreneurs and derive major wealth elsewhere or through investments. It really is very much linked to the property market. So good news that for SA Inc. As Seeff, then, how do you position yourself in this environment? What does Seeff 2021 look like? Obviously, continuing on this road to offer digital services. Just to give me a glimpse into what you're focusing on this year.
So, Michael, what was interesting over the pandemic period was the ability for me personally to be in contact with my team. We're over 1,200 agents and admin staff. It's 1,700 people within the group. and I communicated and interacted with them more during the lockdown period than I've had and been able to do so, all from my dining room table. So we would have Google Hangouts, we would have grouping, we would organize training, we did workshops together, etc. Gave the agents targets, asked them to feedback, etc. All within an opportunity for me to allow to actually be 1 on 10, 1 on 20, 1 on 50 with a group of our agents, which otherwise I might well, because of the geographic nature and diverse element of where everybody is, see once, maybe twice a year. Here we're seeing them once, twice a month, sometimes even more. So I think that's the positive we're going to take out. We are focusing on the uptake of tech and training our agents in a tech environment. So we've got new systems and new back office systems we're implementing now. We've got a new CRM system, and it's now training and getting our guys up to that speed so that they can operate with our software, but independently in an environment as we're experiencing now. And I think that augurs very well. I'm very positive about our future and what we're looking at in 2021.
On that point, Sam, you did mention earlier the average age of the agent out in the field, mid-50s.
Yeah.
Where are the new agents coming from? Do you think that this environment might be an opportune time to start attracting the next generation of agents into the market?
Yeah, I definitely think that is the case. What we're seeing now is a combination of skills between your old style agent. It was a relationship-based offering. You created your network, you created your own database, but you might not have called it a database. It was a sphere of influence, is what the term was in the older days. And so you have those people with good selling skills. It's not enough anymore. You now need younger people with good technological skills. But technological skills, again, without good relationship skills, equally not as good. So it's a combination. What we're finding is we need to be inculcating the younger agent who has technological skills, and we will add to them and supplement the selling skills and negotiating skills, how to build that relationship. But certainly what we are seeing is younger agents. Definitely there's a propensity for them to come into the industry, whereas it used to be very much a second career and very much something I'll get onto when I'm older. I don't want to do this. We're definitely finding that there's a whole uptake of a younger cohort who's saying, right, this is an interesting opportunity, let's investigate.
Well, that is very interesting. Just as a concluding thought, you're a very well-known thought leader, very outspoken business leader in the country. And there's always this constant narrative in South Africa. We're either going over the cliff or we're making steady progress in the right direction. How do you see it? And what are some of the big lessons and take-homes that you'd like to share with other business leaders out there as a parting message?
So, Michael, I think it's a two-part question. So let me deal with the first part. I think we're seeing it now in very much a tale of two markets, as Charles Dickens would have said, tale of two cities. It's a tale of two markets. You've got the middle to lower end, fueled by lower interest rates, which are very positive. They can buy now for the same that they would have been paying at a rental. They can get perhaps even a greater square meterage. They can create stability, put roots down, all very positive. On the other hand, you have a middle to upper end and a right at the very top end, which is very, very slow at the moment. And they are pessimistic, if I want to call it, about where South Africa Inc. is going. And they're going to need some signs of saying this is a good investment before I commit myself. So they're going to need some signs of good growth in GDP, good clamping down on corruption, good governance, etc. When that happens, I think there will be a strong demand back into that upper end, but at the moment it's very, very quiet. So they're voting with their money and leaving it in their back pocket at this stage, despite the fact that there's tremendously good value and good bargains to be had out there. So I think that answers the first part of the question. Insofar as what we've learned and sharing some of the lessons, the lesson we learned, and I think we carried it through through this pandemic, was something we learned when the global financial crisis came about in 2010, was that to sit around and wait for the market to improve was a very dangerous thing. You have to create an energy. So we did it internally when the pandemic struck and the lockdown happened. We said, guys, this isn't a holiday. We're not taking a holiday until people open up. We're going to go out and we're going to do a boot camp training. We're going to go back to basics. We're going to set you a number of training sessions to do, to follow, to make sure that you answer, that you get your certificates that we will apply. We will go through all your old sellers and start re-qualifying them and catch up with your old buyers and refine your database, etc. So we actually put our agents to work. We created an energy that perhaps the market wasn't giving, but we decided that it was important. And what happened from that energy, as soon as the lockdown finished, we were already in the starting blocks, and as I called it, business fit. So it was like a pre-season training. And when it happened, we were ready to go. And we learned that from the global financial crisis, that if you sit around waiting, you're in trouble. You've got to go out and find a market. We were lucky we had the 2010 World Cup, and we used that as an opportunity to go and bring in all those properties that we were going to house the hordes, the hundreds of thousands of visiting foreign fans, which never came. But allowing us to get out and speak to sellers and speak to landlords, it allowed us and gave us a greater activity, a greater energy, a greater positive frame of mind, and helped us over that period. And same with this, with the epidemic, you have to keep yourself busy. You've got to create energy. And I think we did that successfully.
Yeah, and much like sport emulates business, or business emulates sport, we see the successful sports teams all have that energy coming through the camp. And my beloved Liverpool certainly lost a little bit of that this year due to an injury crisis, but that's what Klopp did to that team. And I think great advice, Sam, for other business leaders out there on how to approach dips and crises that happen. I mean, let's face it, this is not the last crisis that's ever going to impact your business or this economy. So you really have to learn from these, as you did through the global financial crisis as well. Great pleasure talking to you as always, and kicking the bricks of the residential property sector. Take care.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks very much indeed.